This is my final project for ELPA 7820, a reflection on each chapter of Organization and Administration in Higher Education, edited by Schloss and Cragg. And for each chapter of the textbook, I have reflected on it and on how it applies to my own attempts to be an administrator in higher education, and come up with one or more critical questions that I think need to be answered going forward. And then toward the end of the presentation, I will attempt to make a suggestion about how we might employ a strategy to answer some of these questions. So for Chapter 1, Understanding the Range of Post-Secondary Issues and Programs, I think the critical question is, who are we trying to serve and who should we be trying to serve? This chapter emphasized the difference in Carnegie classifications, and I've been thinking a lot about the differences between the population served by community colleges and other types of institutions. Chapter 2, Key Leadership Positions and Performance Expectations. Critical question here. How do we design an organizational chart that encourages collaboration across the institution? As we see institutions becoming more and more specialized and administrators within those institutions being more and more specialized, particularly at universities, how do we remain collaborative? How do we remain focused on the impact of our policies, procedures, and administrative decisions on teaching, learning, and the student experience? Maybe a little bit more than one question there. Chapter 3 was about internal governance, committees, and advisory groups. Critical question here: to what extent do we empower these groups to make decisions and execute? We may have committees, we may have advisory groups. Do they understand their charge? Is their charge clear? Is their mission clear? Is their authority clear? And when it is not, it leads to confusion and frustration. After many, many meetings of these groups, they may have a clear recommendation that's dismissed out of hand by the cabinet. So it's important to know right up front whether or not they will be heard and whether they actually have any decision-making authority. Chapter 4, Student Governance and Involvement in Leadership, and I'm going to return to student involvement in making a suggestion to answer these questions. But I think it's important to understand the extent to which our Student Government Association is representative. How many votes were cast in the election, for instance? What percentage of our student body votes? How many votes are needed to be elected president? And then in seeking to increase the student voice, because, spoiler alert, the representation that is revealed through our election process, it's not an extremely representative election. So if we are to increase student voice, should we invest more heavily in our SGA? Should we promote alternatives to SGA, other student representative structures? Or should we really do both? And I think we probably ought to do both. Chapter 5 was about administrative aspects of accreditation and assessment. Involved us watching a video with Dr. Belle Whelan of reflections on that she has about common myths about SACs. But I think we know a lot about accreditation. We think a lot about accreditation, but I wonder sometimes to what extent our community understands and values accreditation, and how we can emphasize the value of regional accreditation. I think to a lay person, a regional accreditation sounds less valuable than national accreditation. And I don't know exactly how to make that case in the community, that it's important for community members to attend an accredited institution, and even more important or further important that they attend a regionally accredited institution. That's just not a distinction that our community understands. Chapter 6, the nature and role of budget processes. think the critical questions here: what level of transparency is appropriate in the budget process? Thinking about, how much do faculty know, should they know about the budget process? How much should staff know? How much should students know? And if more transparency is appropriate, and I would argue that more transparency is appropriate, although I don't know about total transparency, but if we say that we do need more, what is the process for increasing it? This kind of connects to the previous point about advisory groups and committees. In increasing transparency and trying to consult more widely with the college constituents, we do have to maintain clarity about to what extent their input will be considered in the process. Chapter 7 was a guide to the development of an institutional strategic plan. This begins several chapters on strategic planning and its various aspects. I really think the critical question here is, how might we increase the number of sources of information that are actively considered in developing the strategic plan? As a mid-level administrator, my perception of the strategic plan is that it was developed in a room somewhere by a very small group of people. And even though it purports to drive the work of the institution, it sometimes lacks connection to our daily activity. I thought this graphic was extremely good from within the textbook. This is just a recreation from page 136. And in creating this strategic plan and identifying the outcome of this graphic, the strategic issues and opportunities, it is important to look internally, to look externally, and then particularly on the external scan, even more than just looking externally, to really understand the competitors. We'll return to this graphic later as I make a suggestion for answering these types of questions. Chapter 8, again about strategic planning. Strategic planning when aligning curriculum and resources. The critical question here, I think, needs to be looked at in light of two graphics from this chapter. This is the first. This is what the organization may look like when everybody is a free agent. And we see here we have all kinds of different units moving in all kinds of different directions. You look over on the right at faculty member number 3, not even pointed in remotely the same direction as the rest of the units. Of course, they're all diverging from each other. And then you look at the idea of unity of purpose, and if that can be achieved, I thought this was a wonderful graphic that I would like to reference going forward when I talk to people about the importance of alignment. If you think of the system unit, the organizational unit, the administrative unit, the curricular unit, for those of us who are not faculty members, we can kind of apply our own relevant analogies here. But each one of these has a purpose that is nested inside the larger purpose as you move up the organizational chart. Everybody's moving in the same direction, and each individual's contributing to their unit, which contributes to a larger unit, and so on and so on. This would be perfect alignment, would require true understanding from each individual about how their work relates to the overall strategy of the institution and even of the system. But I don't think that's the reality today. It certainly would be the ideal. And when you look in Chapter 9, Economic and Tactical Considerations for Aligning Curriculum and Resources, the critical question here is, what impact do cost-saving measures have on learning? And the cost-saving measures here being smaller classes and use of adjuncts. That's an important question. There seems to be some conflicting data in the literature about the use of adjuncts, about class size, and certainly those are things that are being looked at and we need to look at locally at every institution. Chapter 10, Effectively Managing Human Resources in 21st Century Colleges and Universities. What is the impact of tenure on human resources practices? I would refer to the interview that we conducted with our HR director last semester, where he said, and it surprised those of us who interviewed him, that he really did not see tenure as protecting faculty members from general progressive discipline. And that was, again, a surprising comment, that he really felt that tenure is protected more for academic freedom and academic decisions. But I do think that there is a general perception that tenured faculty are immune from virtually any negative outcomes. So I think that's an interesting question from Chapter 10. Chapter 11, Shaping Philanthropic Efforts That Support Institutional Priorities. How can we increase support for our overall work and free up designated and targeted resources? For instance, our scholarship fund, hundreds of little scholarships, important, but small amounts in many cases, that are designated and targeted. They are, a couple $1,000s perhaps for graduates of one particular high school going into one particular major. And sometimes we struggle to find even one qualified student for those scholarships. And so how do we encourage our community, our philanthropic donors, to have a little bit of faith in our ability to put their money to good use and unrestrict some of their donations? Chapter 12, Developing Crisis Management and Emergency Plans. Are our emergency communications sent in such a way that our students will see them? We're texting now. I think everyone is texting now, and that's valuable. That's the best way to know, or we assume it's the best way to know that students will actually get the message. But are we on the platforms that they are on? Our Facebook page gets a lot of traffic and a lot of comments when we might be having a snow day. But other than that, are our students engaging there? If they're not engaging there, what are the emerging networks where we need to be? Not just making emergency announcements, but monitoring and understanding the traffic on those networks so that we can get ahead of potentially growing incidents on our campus. Chapter 13, Key Legal Aspects for Higher Education Administrators, particularly FERPA, Title IX. How well versed are our campus constituents? So faculty, staff, students with FERPA and Title IX. And if the level of knowledge is not where it should be, are we at risk? What are the implications if we don't get FERPA and Title IX correct? And that is something we've done a tremendous amount of work on, particularly around Title IX. We've had marketing campaigns around that. But I still see occasions when I think that FERPA may not be fully understood across our campus, and that is of some concern. So when we think about all these different 13 chapters worth of critical questions, is there a way to answer most of them? Is there a different strategy than we're currently using to answer these questions? And I really think so. Back to this slide here about sources of information. And if you take those three sources of information that ought to be baked into our strategic plan, and you really think about them in terms of a Venn diagram, we operate internally. We can do internal assessment perhaps the best because as administrators, we are internal. External scans require us to kind of come out of our own element and try to understand and represent a different aspect. Competitor analysis, same situation. But there is a group that occupies the space that is the intersection of these three areas. And that group is students. Students, move between the external environment and the internal environment. They're here, but they're also actively out in the community. And students who are making decisions between Chattanooga State and other institutions are engaged in their own competitor analysis. They understand, many of them, why they're here and why they're not somewhere else. And it's important for us to understand the decision making that goes into students' decisions to enroll here. Are they here because of things that we offer that others don't? Are they here because they had a negative experience elsewhere those types of questions. And so I think that we need to really capitalize on the natural intersection of internal, external, and competitor, that really we wrap that up and we say that is the experience that our students have. Our students occupy all three of these spaces and can be helpful in every area. Specific proposal to answer some of these critical questions or to provide an ongoing resource to get at those answers is the establishment of a student voice panel. We need to increase the voice of our students desperately, and we need to do it intentionally. And so the suggestion here is to identify 30 students still in high school that say that they're coming to Chattanooga State and engage them while they're still in high school as mystery shoppers. We need to do that with diversity of feeder high schools and demographic diversity. I would propose that they each receive a $500 scholarship, $50 per meeting for 10 meetings. Meetings, in my estimation, would be about 90 minutes. And scatter those meetings throughout their experience at the college. First of all, September of the senior year, ask them about the factors they're considering in making the college decision. Ask them how they go about finding answers to the questions that come up, understanding that not everybody at meeting one would end up applying and deciding on Chattanooga State. This would be an opportunity to kind of expose them to the idea of the student voice panel. And then at meeting 2 in November of their senior year, this would be only for those who had committed to coming to Chattanooga State and want to know what they're hearing from their peers about the choices that they're making about college. What have they heard about Chattanooga State? What have they heard from Chattanooga State? Do they know what their next step is? We have a perception in the community and even among some high school counselors that our communication is lacking, and I think there may be something to that. But it's important that we ask our incoming students to shed light on those communication issues. February of their senior year, third meeting, I would recommend that they do that meeting on campus, that they take a campus tour and that they give specific feedback about the things that they've seen that increase or decrease their confidence in the decision to come to Chattanooga State. We could use that information to revise our campus tour for others, and it would be incredibly valuable. April of their senior year, as they're preparing to graduate, how do they know that they're completely ready to begin? Do they know, and this is a bit of a leading question, what they need to do immediately after graduation? For instance, are they aware that they need to request a final high school transcript? And by that point, by the fourth meeting, they will have spent some really serious time with us, and hopefully we will have established enough of a relationship with this group that we could get their honest feedback, again, about the level of communication that they're receiving from us, things that are clear, things that are confusing. July, before their freshman year of college, I would recommend that we pull their admission and financial aid status, get them in the room and say, okay, what do you think your status is? And I really do think we would find that most students, or at least a substantial number, would believe that they were completely ready to go, but they're not. And then the conversation could try to get at those answers. Why? Why did you think that you were completely ready to go when you still need to complete your financial aid verification? Just as one example. August, before the freshman year of college, an on-campus meeting to find all their classrooms, and then really to just sort of take the students' temperature. How are they feeling as they prepare to embark on their experience? Then in September, as they've actually begun college, what is going well, what's not going well, talk about extracurricular involvement and try to encourage that. But then also, because if this program works, in the September of their freshman year, we'd be beginning the next round of the Student Voice Panel with students still in high school. So what advice would they give to themselves from a year ago? November of their freshman year, it needs to be very focused on advising. How do they know what to take? How do they know who their advisor is? Not leading them too much, but just really trying to understand how they have come to that information. The feedback they have about their classes, I think we could ask some specific questions to try to get at the difference in student experience between full-time and adjunct faculty. and particularly around interaction outside of class, because we know that is something that is much more likely to be provided by full-time faculty. That would be a very meaty meeting. November, the freshman year, would be a substantial meeting to really understand the nuance and the depth of the students' experience at Chattanooga State so far. Meeting number 9, April of the freshman year, just a checkpoint meeting. Again, what's working, what's not, do you know what you need to do before coming back next year? Any of these meetings, we could add topics that are related to the critical questions already proposed. And then in meeting number 10, final meeting, describe your path from here to graduation. Reflect on your experience in the Student Voice Panel program. Back to this graphic. The sources of information, internal assessment, competitor analysis, and external scan, again, all occupied simultaneously by our students. It's really time for us to harness the power of our students' voice to provide us. They are a natural source of information. We just need to come up with some intentional ways to tap into that information. Thank you.